who is Dynasty RB1? I mean, there's a few different guys that you can throw up in here for this conversation about the Dynasty RB1. We can talk about GIBBS. We can talk about BIJAN. We can talk about BREECE. I wouldn't put CMC up there, but you can make an argument
in
to
the
put
conversation
CMC at 1 as well. So I think that he is in the conversation. So a few different guys that we can talk about here. Let's talk about BIJAN first. Okay, let's talk about BIJAN because he was the Dynasty RB1 coming into the season, going to Atlanta.
Not even close. Wasn't even close.
Not even close. He was the RB1. And things didn't kind of work out how we thought they would. Now, we still, RB12 on the season, if I'm not mistaken? He's got 203 carries for 948 yards with 4 touchdowns. He's got 78 targets, 51 catches for 384 yards on 3 touchdowns. So 7 total tutties on the season.
1,200 yards, over 1,200 yards of scrimmage, close to 1,300 yards.
He's still giving us solid production, but we know that he should be giving us so much more. He's not being given the opportunities that we feel he should be given. So does that automatically bump him down? Does that automatically take him out of the RB1 conversation if we're talking about right now? I mean, we know what he can do, but he is a running back. We know they don't last long. We know these guys get injured. So there's only so much of a window for these running backs to produce and give us these huge seasons. So what is the thoughts on BIJAN now? Is he still the RB1, or is this an actual conversation now that other guys can be ahead of him at this point?
So there's a caveat to this. And the one caveat that you didn't bring up was the coaching staff. Like that is the caveat, right? Because just take a quick peek at the numbers to support what I'm about to say here. There's games where he's had 19, 22, 16, 18, and 15 carries. Outside of those games, he's had 10, 10, 14, 14, 13, 11, 11, 10, and 12. 7 in there, a 1 mixed in. That was, remember that weird game where he got 1 carry because he was sick, apparently. But now, to be fair, the targets, I love the targets, right? He's got, 78 targets, and he'll probably finish with 83, 84, somewhere in there. So that's fantastic. I love the targets in the passing game, but it just feels like that coaching staff is holding him back from being truly elite. Now, is that a product of them not wanting to wear him down? Is that a product of Arthur Smith just thinking he's smarter than everybody? I don't know. I can't answer that question directly, but I will say the biggest thing holding BIJAN back from being the #1 running back is that coaching staff in Atlanta.
Coaching staff is obviously a big thing. Is Arthur Smith gone? Is he not gone? And it's rough because if you're looking at for just next year, obviously just that uncertainty makes you want to feel like, okay, do I feel safer with a Jahmyr Gibbs? Do I feel safer with a Christian McCaffrey? Do I feel safer with
Aaron Rodgers?
Breece Hall, especially with an Aaron Rodgers now coming back next season? So now comes into discussion of Jahmyr Gibbs, right? He was coming in as pretty much the RB2 or 3, at least in the top 3, 4 for most people coming in, right behind BIJAN. We expected a ton out of the gate as he was drafted as a top 15 pick, and we didn't see that right off, right? And there were question marks. Okay, here we go. Now it's DeAndre Swift again. Monty's going to get all the touches, and Monty got hurt a little bit. We saw Gibbs finally kind of show us what he can do, and then he kind of earned a role now for the rest of the season. And on the season now, RB8. 169 rushes for 915 yards, 9 touchdowns, another 70 targets, 52 catches for 316 and a tutty. Really playing awesome, on the field a lot more lately. And now he's seeming to be getting, since pretty much week 7-ish, he seems to be getting at least what I've been saying the whole time, like a 10-ish to 15 carries and like a 4 to 7 targets. Like that's kind of what we've been seeing. Now there's a few games where he didn't get those targets, and he's been a little bit kind of, I don't want to say up and down, but there's been a few dud games in there, but he's giving you just a ton of upside with the pass catching. And of course, when he's rushing too, we can see how electric he is. He's got, 9 rushing touchdowns on the season. And we always thought that Monty was going to be the guy that's yamming it in there. And for the most part, he is, but Gibbs is just getting just explosive plays. Now comes into the conversation. Is Jahmyr Gibbs ahead of BIJAN So we don't even have to talk about 1 and 2. Let's just talk about Jahmyr Gibbs, BIJAN for a second. Is Jahmyr Gibbs ahead of BIJAN? Would you take Jahmyr Gibbs over BIJAN?
I would, for a couple of reasons. Obviously, you laid out how awesome he is, the role he's carved out. He's proved that he's valuable when he's getting between 18 and 22 opportunities a game. For me, the 5.4 yards a carry on a significant amount of carries. What do we say? He had 169 carries.
Yep.
When you have 169 carries and you're averaging 5.4 yards a carry, that's a good enough sample size to let me know that this guy is amazing, right? And another 70 targets to boot. And remember, he didn't have a role those first 4 weeks for the most part. Now, obviously, the Monty injury kind of opened the door for them to see what Gibbs can do. And he had that bust out game against Baltimore, as you said, in week 7, where he had the he had his first touchdown. And then he had the crazy game against Vegas where he ran for $152. So they know what he can do. And just to further the point a little bit, he's playing on a better offense. He's playing on a better team. He's playing for a better head coach. He's playing for a team that organizationally, we never looked at the Lions and were like, yeah, this is a really good organization. They're a good organization now because of their head coach, Dan Campbell, right? He's got those boys doing work and he utilizes his best players. He's not dumb. He knows that for them to go where they want to go and for them to be effective, Jahmyr Gibbs has to be an integral part of that offense, right? And they have it feels like Jahmyr Gibbs complements David Montgomery perfectly. Like it feels like they're the perfect complement where David Montgomery is getting 15 carries a game and Jahmyr Gibbs is getting another 10, 11, 12 with, as you said, 5-6 targets in the passing game. So they just have all the pieces that fit well. And he's utilized on a consistent basis every single game. Whereas we have to wonder if BIJAN is going to get used 4 times a game or 20 times a game. It's Jahmyr Gibbs for me at this point.
It is tough because, like, you can look at BIJAN and say, okay, well, you know what? Right now, BIJAN is kind of getting almost the same-ish kind of work as Gibbs, 10-ish to 15 carries, maybe 4 to 7 targets. Obviously on a worse offense. So, I mean, how much worse can it get for BIJAN? You could argue,
fair,
right? You could also argue, okay, Jahmyr Gibbs is what, RB8 right now. BIJAN is RB12. If things get better for BIJAN, or if he's getting the 20 carries plus all the 5 to 7 targets a game as well, that is obviously going to vault him into the top RB finishes. So you could argue that maybe we're not as confident for BIJAN next season, but maybe the year after. And I mean, obviously that's wishful thinking. And of course, the RB landscape changes, right? From season to season, injuries happen and all that. So, I think for maybe particularly next season, for sure, you might want Gibbs over BIJAN. But for the long run, would you rather have a guy like BIJAN where we know that potential is that 20-25 carries and the receptions and the targets in the passing game? Like, we know what that could be because it's just more important of what the coaching staff is going to do. It doesn't matter what we want or what we think, right? The coaching staff and the NFL is going to do what they want. And I think that is where you have to decide, do you want to go for that upside or do you want to just say, fuck it, I know what Gibbs is. I know what he's going to give me. Like, why play that game with BIJAN? Why should I take the chance on that?
I think BIJAN has more of a workhorse type role or ceiling, I should say. BIJAN has more of a workhorse type ceiling than Gibbs does, but Gibbs is just being utilized so much more effectively on a better offense with a better offensive line, better weapons around him that get him the ball. I feel like Gibbs doesn't need 25 carries to be as effective as BIJAN in their particular situations. All things being equal, BIJAN is probably the better guy, right? He's the workhorse type guy, whereas Gibbs is more of where you want to keep him in that 15 to 18 range so he could have maximum efficiency. There's caveats to this though, right? We have to look at it from the situations that they're in because all things being equal, it's BIJAN and it's not close, but all things are not equal. And these guys are on different teams with, all the things I talked about in terms of quarterback, head coach, wide receivers, offensive line, et cetera, et cetera. So those things are a factor. And at this standpoint, it's Gibbs.
Like you said, 20-25 carries in that matter, that is like the ceiling. That's what, we know that he can do. That's what we're hoping for, but but is it ever going to get to that point? Like, he's supposed to be the next, Saquon-ish, like, he's supposed to get that workhorse role. Is that going to happen if a new coach comes in? or is it not? Like, or would you rather just not take that chance and just have Gibbs instead? So I think for me, like I think I'm with you. I'd rather have Gibbs. And then when I know shit changes for BIJAN and he might get that 20-25 touches, it's not going to cost you probably much, if anything, to go from Gibbs to BIJAN. What do you guys think out there? You got Gibbs or BIJAN? Who do you have over who? And then we're going to talk about the other two guys that I think are in this conversation, which are BREECE Hall and Christian McCaffrey. Let's talk about BREECE Hall, who finishing the season strong on a team that lost Aaron Rodgers. Not great offensively, but came away with, at least as of right now, 74 catches on 93 targets, 579 yards for 4 tutties. Another 4 touchdowns on the ground, 816 yards, 186 carries, pretty much finishing what, RB4, depending on your league. So BREECE Hall, who was pretty much the RB1 before BIJAN came along, right? And BREECE wound up getting hurt, finishing as of right now in the top 5. What do we think about BREECE Hall and his season?
It's kind of gotten overshadowed because that team has been so bad and there were such high expectations with Aaron Rodgers coming into the fold. Yeah, BREECE Hall's season's kind of gotten overshadowed with how bad the Jets have been versus what their expectations were. And BREECE Hall hasn't been incredibly effective. Like there's games where he's had 2 yards a carry, 1.5, 3.25, 1 point. Like his efficiency hasn't been good. And that's because the Jets stink. Their offensive line stinks. Like we know that. So for him to be in the top 4, that kind of feels like a floor, right? Like if he's doing this well on this bad of a team, and I think he's buoying a lot of his production with those catches, because if you look since basically week 8, he's had 9 targets, 6 targets, 9 targets, 8 targets, 9 targets. Bro, he had 16 targets against Washington in week 16. So he's really doing his thing in terms of buoying his production on a really bad team. If they improve the offensive line this offseason and Aaron Rodgers is back, he could be RB1 overall next season, potentially, right? With the way Aaron could get him the ball, if that offensive line is at least a little bit better. So overall, this is probably about as good as you could have hoped for BREECE Hall, considering all the other factors that went on with the Jets this season.
Just looking at the receptions, obviously, for BREECE Hall and the targets. Could you argue that next season with Aaron Rodgers back, it is not going to be that high, because Aaron Rodgers is actually throwing the ball downfield and not dropping it underneath as much? But you can also argue that BREECE will make up for that in rushing yards and rushing touchdowns. Like we've seen Aaron Jones finish as, a top 5 guy, top 10 guy, numerous years with Aaron Rodgers, 50-ish catches or so. So I do think that the targets and receptions come down, but I think he still can have, 300 to 500 yards receiving, but then he can reach that maybe 1,200, 1,300 yards rushing in a better offense and more rushing touchdowns.
That's where I was going to go with that. How many more rushing touchdowns would he have? Because if Aaron's there, right, you got to spread out a little bit. You got to respect the receiving core. What if they go out there and get Devontae Adams this offseason? Like, especially down there at that goal line. So yeah, like I said, for BREECE, and I didn't even realize BREECE Hall was RB4. Now he did have that monster game against Washington, as I said, where he had 43 points in full PPR. So that kind of vaulted him, but he's had some really good games. Houston, he had a really good game. Denver in week 5, he had a really good game. Philly, he had a solid game. He's been probably about as good as you could have hoped for. Like I said, he hasn't missed any games, right? I think week 2, he may have gotten injured. He only got 4 carries or something. I don't know what was going on there. He wasn't being utilized very much the first month because I guess coming off the injury, etc. That's why they brought in a Dalvin Cook. So even throw that on top of it, right? The numbers could be a little or even a little more skewed because he virtually didn't do a ton the first month outside of that first game. Imagine this is the floor.
And then you talk about CMC, right? The other guy in that conversation.
He's obviously number 1. He's a number 1 overall player.
Almost 1,500 rushing yards right now. Another almost 600 receiving.
21.
21 touchdowns. Just unreal at 27 years old. Now we do see obviously the decline, that comes with it. the injuries that can happen as they get older. He's a little banged up right now, actually. Looks like he's going to be out for this week.
Well, that's because they clinched the 1 seed.
And of course they clinched as well. But I mean, he did come up a little bit hobbled. You had mentioned, with the usage on Christian McCaffrey, that you were a little bit worried about that going into next season. We've seen him finish as RB2 last year, RB1 so far this year. Is he a guy that starts to decline, or are we still riding him out for the next few years? Like, he is in the conversation for that RB1 in Dynasty, even at his age. What do you think? And is he really in that conversation, or can he just be taken out just by age automatically? Or are we just taking the production and saying this is just overruling the youth and the years to come with what Christian McCaffrey is right now? Does he still have maybe 2, maybe 3 years left?
I think this is a similar conversation to what we have when we talk about wide receivers and we include Tyreek Hill in there, right? It's the same exact parallel, because the production is so incredible that it does start to overrate or overtake the youth of the other guys, right? It starts to become like, damn, this guy is just head and shoulders production wise above, all these, even these younger guys, right? The production is just there. So yeah, I mean, listen, he's in the conversation. The thing, and you had mentioned it, I get concerned with his usage, like, and the way San Francisco runs the ball with him. Like, they're running him between the tackles. Like, that makes me nervous. But his carries have tapered off a little bit towards down the stretch of the season. He hasn't had a 20 carry game since week 11 against Tampa Bay. So, and the most carries he's had in the game is 22, and that was week 1. But why does it feel like he's had like 25, 30 carries in a game? Doesn't it feel like that from the eye test?
Because he's catching the ball and fucking running as well. So they're throwing those, those little short ones. He's got some games where, 5 catches, 5 catches, 6 catches, 5 catches, 6 catches.
Even the targets are crazy.
So he's getting a shit ton of targets and catches.
Christian McCaffrey currently has 355 opportunities between targets and rushing attempts. 355. That's a lot for their style. And San Francisco they're a physical type team, right? It's a lot for me. And it definitely concerns me, but because the production is so good, because they have a really good coach, a really good team, a really good offensive line, all the things we talked about with San Francisco before, is that I still feel comfortable over the next 2 to 3 years about Christian McCaffrey being productive. But it does concern me, the usage. Like, I honestly thought, and remember going back to the beginning of the season, we were talking about, like, yeah, Eli Mitchell should be involved. If Eli Mitchell's getting 8-10 carries a game, especially down there at the goal line, like, they're not fucking around at the goal line. They're using Christian McCaffrey at the goal line. So that was really interesting to see early on in the season. And that kind of made me a little nervous. Like, damn, is he going to be able to hold up? And Christian McCaffrey has had some injuries in the past, right? Remember those couple of years in Carolina? I think he finished RB1 and RB2. And then for 2 straight years, he was just injured. So it was like, damn, maybe all that usage in Carolina, kind of caught up with him. And then, he goes to San Francisco and they sprinkle the fountain of youth on the guy, and he's just an absolute maniac again. So I listen, he's amazing. He definitely belongs in the conversation because of the productivity, the absolute just overwhelming productivity.
I don't know if I could put him at RB1, but it really depends on how you look at it. And Diaz has mentioned something about that in here. It really depends, like, how you want to rank them, because rankings are obviously very subjective, right? You have your age, you have the production, you have, the coaching staff, the future, the contracts. Like, there's so many things, obviously, that you can look at. Is it like startup rankings? Is it, by value? Like, how do you want to look at it? So being all in all, I mean, I'm okay with any of these guys really being anybody's RB1. They're all guys that are great running backs and deserving to even say they are RB1 dynasty running backs. But Breece Hall, Jahmyr Gibbs, Bijan Robinson, CMC, for me at least, those are the 4 guys that are in the conversation. And if I had to rank them, I'd probably have Gibbs, Breece, Bijan, CMC. I mean, that's probably how I would rank it, mainly just because of CMC's age. I know at any point in time, like, that's a ticking time bomb. And you can say that about any of these running backs, because they're running back, obviously. But and the reason why I kind of would rank him that way is because I think right now, in most people's eyes, Jahmyr Gibbs is the RB1. BIJAN and BREECE, I mean, you could kind of go back and forth, but people still love BIJAN. So that's why I'd probably have him second and then have BREECE, or either or. I mean, they're kind of the same for me, and then CMC. So, if you want to go by value-wise, I think, you can argue that. And all of these guys are worth like 2+ firsts. I mean, you're not getting these guys for cheap. And, that's why I don't recommend buying any of these guys. Like when you're talking about buying some of these guys, I mean, these guys cost way too much to buy.
For too much volatility.
If you're in a startup and you want to take one of these anchor guys and kind of build around them, like, okay, like that is one strategy that you can use. I wouldn't really advise it because one injury kind of crushes that. But that would be kind of the only way that I would probably have one of these running backs. Like I don't want to buy some of these guys, that's why we like to stash running backs. That's why, Kyron Williams, Jerome Fords, like I've got them on a ton of teams. I'm just stashing backup running backs and just hoping one of these guys finally gets a chance through injuries that always happen at the running back position. So what do you got here, Hammer? What is your kind of order of these guys, or how exactly do you look at it? Are you looking at it as, a kind of startup value? Or are you looking at it as kind of trade value or production? Like, what do you factor in? How do you factor in your rankings?
I think you have to factor them all in. For me, it is the combination of production and situation. That's kind of how I look at it. And I brought that up with the Gibbs BIJAN difference, right? Because like I said, all things being equal, BIJAN is the guy over Gibbs, but the situation matters, right? Gibbs is playing on a much better team with a much better offense line, all that good stuff. So I would have Gibbs 1, I would have BIJAN 2, I would have CMC 3, and BREECE 4. That offensive line with the Jets is a concern for me. I don't know if you can fix that entirely in one season. The Aaron Rodgers thing should help, but I think Christian McCaffrey's just overwhelming production, and it doesn't seem like there's anything that's going to stop him other than injury from being productive over the next 2+ seasons. So it would be Gibbs 1, BIJAN 2. If BIJAN had a different coaching staff and whatever, he'd be 1. CMC 3, BREECE 4. But as you said, man, all these guys can be interchangeable in terms of, obviously Christian McCaffrey with the age notwithstanding, these guys can be interchangeable because we know how awesome they can be. But the running back situation is just such a fucking crapshoot. It really is.
It's just weird because even though I put CMC at 4, like if I had to choose between any of these guys, I want CMC. He's going to be the RB1. Like, I mean, if you're telling me he's scoring 20 tutties on a good offense, like that's the guy, of course, that you want. But the problem is he still cost you 2+ first, but he's not, like, he shouldn't be worth that because of the age, but he is just because of the production that he's putting out. So it's like, it's very hard to go out and buy any of these guys. What do y'all think? How would you guys rank these guys in order from 1 to 4, I guess? Or maybe you have somebody else in that top 4. BIJAN, Gibbs, BREECE Hall, CMC. How do you guys have them? Or do y'all have anybody else in that top 4?
It really gets tough towards, especially when you're talking about the top of the top in terms of like separating them 1 versus 2, right? You kind of have to look for things in terms of, and I think Diaz actually brought up a good point in terms of tiers. And we do the running back, wide receiver, quarterback tiers. We've done that a couple of times. I'm pretty sure we'll do it again before the season starts. So I think that's a really good point by Diaz in terms of tiers, because it's hard to separate some of these guys, right? It's hard to like pick hairs with certain guys. And then obviously when you factor in the age of a CMC versus the youth of a Gibbs, BIJAN, and BREECE, and then the other factor is the teams they're on. So,
consider ETN possibly in that group. I don't really. In the top 4, no.
Top 8, maybe?
He's got a ton of tutties.
Not crazy efficiency, though. 3.79 a carry.
Like, he hasn't had 20 carries since week 12. Like, he was getting just a ton of more carries earlier in the season.
And the touchdowns. He went on a 3-game streak where he had 2+ touchdowns.
Yeah, he's only got 1 game over 100 yards. He's involved in the passing game a lot more, at least than he was last year. That's a good sign. But what can we expect? I mean, from this offense, Trevor Lawrence going forward, you know, are they keeping Ridley? You know, what are they doing? I mean, after those kind of 4 guys that we talked about, BIJAN, CMC, Gibbs, and BREECE, I mean, you've got guys like Jonathan Taylor, Achane, Kyron, right? ETN, Kenneth Walker, Saquon. Yep. Is it JT after that? Is it Achane? Is it Kyron, right? I mean, you can go with any of those guys.
I still like ETN because I do think like Jacksonville has a solid team. I don't think they lived up to anyone's expectations this year in terms of offensive production. Now, ETN's been RB2, but I think that's been kind of skewed a little bit by the touchdown production, which, I mean, listen, 11 touchdowns is really, really good, but it's been sporadic. You know, there's been games where he's been really good, 25, 30 points. And then there's games where he's been bad, 6.5, 8, 6, 9. And the efficiency is what really concerns me, going from 5 yards a carry last year on 220 carries to 3.79 on 250 carries. Now, the receptions did go up. Obviously, he's got 67 targets, only 45 targets last year. So,
yeah, I mean, he's got what, 2 more years and then the option. Saquon, like, how far down can you put Saquon? I mean, he's what, 27, but still a workhorse guy. Does he stay on the Giants, or does he wind up going? I mean, he's
in the same
RB16 this season. I mean,
it's been bad. And he's in the same situation as a Josh Jacobs, literally the same exact situation. I think he's better, but running backs are just so damn fickle. It's that year to year, like you said, and it's so damn true, where these guys you think are really awesome, and then the next year the team goes out and drafts, like, bro, how far did Kenneth Walker fall in our Dynasty subscriber league because they drafted Charbonnet?
Oh, yeah.
Like, I think somebody got Kenneth Walker in like the 6th round or something like that.
ETN too. ETN fell with, you know, with Bigsby. So Achane, if he could stay healthy. Yeah. I mean, listen, I don't love any of these guys that have that kind of value. Like, I just don't want to hold that at my running back position. You know, there's got to be something on your team that you can upgrade to kind of make your team better for the long run. I mean, if you're competing, then absolutely it's great to have any of these guys. But even still, like, I'm okay with moving off if you can get one of those top wide receivers. So depending how you want to shape your team, it's just rough because, you know, as we see, one injury just vaults them down. Devontae was once a top 5 running back. Now he's RB 15.
It happens that quickly for running backs. It really does.
You know, Tony Pollard, RB 20 right now, after he was like a top 10 RB last season, or at least going into the season, right? Ramondre is all the way down here, RB 23. Like, shit hits the fan. Najee, RB 29.
Yeah,
Eckler, RB 30. Mixon, RB 26. I mean,
Henry, Aaron Jones.